The crackdown on Mexico's drug cartels this past year brought hope to many people on both sides of the border. KPBS border reporter Amy Isackson is here to tell us how that story is playing out. Welcome, Amy. So you think that the war against Mexico's drug cartels is your top story for 2009?
I think it is. Looking in the last 3 years since President Calderon took office, it's claimed about 14,000 lives within Mexico, and by some count, this year's death toll is actually more than last year, according to a Mexico newspaper. President Obama has entered the scene. He's made it a national priority in the U.S. and really changed the discourse in terms of looking at this from a binational perspective. The U.S. Congress may also be considering an overhaul of drug policy this year after 40 years of the war on drugs. And I think another aspect that makes this as important is the human rights abuses that have surged, alleged human rights abuses that have surged in Mexico since President Calderon has sent the army around the country.
So have we seen any actual progress, or are all these steps sort of getting us in place to see progress in the future?
Authorities on both sides of the border talk about progress in terms of fighting the drug war as something that's going to take generations. Alan Burson, the border czar for the U.S., compares it to what happened with the mob and cracking down on the mob, that this doesn't happen overnight. However, the goal isn't necessarily to shut down. Mexico's goal isn't to shut down the cartels, but to really break them up into manageable pieces. Now, there's been an upswing in violence, as we said, but authorities in Mexico will say that that's because they are cracking down. Another positive thing on the U.S. side and with Mexico is that they say that they're having binational cooperation, especially here in the San Diego, Tijuana area, like they never have before. Mexico's arrested many high-level people. The number of drug seizures increased this year. However, there's still tons and tons of drugs that are coming across the border. And also, I think something that is important to look at this year is the U.S. discourse. There's signs that the U.S. discourse in terms of drug policy in the U.S. may be changing to look at enforcement, but also to look at treatment and prevention.
And how would that change what's going on in Mexico, the discourse in this country?
The discourse in this country has been enforcement,
right,
with just a little bit of prevention and treatment. And so if the U.S. starts to look at it in a more whole form, I think that it will change what's going on with enforcement, which we've seen that the enforcement only approach hasn't done what it was expected to do.
But now the story's gotten complicated because there have been human rights abuse allegations. How does that play into the story?
The human rights abuse allegations have come up because President Calderon has sent the Mexican army around the country to crack down. And there were concerns that the Mexican army isn't trained for this kind of work and that these human rights abuses were going to, the claims were going to come up, and they have. There's a report by Amnesty International that says that 2,000 claims have been filed in the last about year and a half compared to just hundreds.
So
before.
It's increasing?
It is increasing.
All right, so now we are looking at the year 2010. What are you going to be looking for in a major story in this year ahead?
Again, going back to the drug war here in Tijuana, we've seen in the last few weeks an upsurge in the violence that we had been seeing at the end of last year. So I think it's very important to look at that. People on both sides of the border, in terms of including the U.S. ambassador to Mexico, look at Tijuana as a model, as a test case for the rest of the country. It looked like authorities in Tijuana had made progress. They have in some ways, but now the drug violence is up again, and I think it's very important to keep an eye on that and see what happens.
Thank you so much, Amy Isackson.
Thank you.